Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the second season of our podcast, which is now Life, the Universe, and All the Rest, LUAR. We have exciting news this podcast. That first is that the New York Mets, as we know, many of you are profound Mets fans, have this week went from the worst team in baseball to the second worst team in baseball for 2 whole days before they went back to being the worst team in baseball. But even more important than that is we are very excited to have Stuart Kauffman with us today. And Stuart is, without argumentation, one of the greats in complexity science. Stuart's work in the origins of life and the structure of life is seminal and really laid the foundation for what has come. And so we're really looking forward to this conversation. So I'd just like to start to ask you, sort of right now you've got this new book coming out, or this new work coming out, and it sort of touches on, there's a beautiful line, there's an interview that you did in Noema magazine, which I
Yes.
recommend everyone to see. And you had this beautiful idea that said emergence is not engineering. And I wonder,
Yeah.
maybe we could start sort of from there. What did you mean by emergence is not engineering?
Well, a lot. By engineering, I think I mean physics.
Mm.
Or,
Oh,
you know,
thank
it,
you.
well, I can almost say it, Marcelo. In physics, going back to Newton, if not before, one begins with the Newtonian paradigm in a pre-stated phase space. And so Newton taught us how to think. Shall I just rattle it off?
Sure.
Identify the relevant variables, position and momenta, write laws in differential form, coupling the relevant variables, Newton's laws of motion, define the boundary conditions, which give all possible combinations of values of the relevant variables. So that's the phase space of the system, like the boundaries of the billiard table. But you state that beforehand. You have to know the phase space. Then identify the initial conditions, then integrate the differential equations to deduce the dynamical trajectory of the system in its phase space. So that's all of classical physics. I mean, there's some details in between. So it's the same thing in quantum mechanics. You have fixed boundary conditions. You integrate the Schrodinger equation to get an entailed trajectory of the evolution of a probability distribution. Then the magic of whatever measurement is. It's a collapse of the wave function or multiple worlds or whatever. So it's all on the same framework. No new possibilities arise.
So you're saying, guys, sorry, so just for sort of people to understand, because I think this is such an important idea for the three of us in the blind spot. There's something I'm writing right now, this idea of pre-stated, right? Pre-stated phase space. So for non-scientists, what we mean by a phase space, it's just all the possible states that something could have, right? All the possible ways the possible ways it could be. And in physics, what we need, what Stu was talking about, is the idea that we always say, like, oh, we know what all those possibilities are. Like, even if we're not doing anything with them, we can at least say what all those possibilities are. And then we follow particles, follow animals, follow whatever system it is, societies, as they move around through all the possible conditions it could have. And I think, so Stu, what you're saying is that, but that's not really true. We can't really pre-state those. And that's a radical idea for physics.
Yeah, so what's at stake is, if I am right that emergence is not that, so let's really debate it. Because it's really big, it means there's something that's going on in the universe that we cannot capture in fixed phase spaces. So to jump ahead, I think biological evolution is the proof that novelty keeps arising. And I can go through it in detail pretty easily, but let me give the overview. Life started on Earth, we think, about 4 billion years ago. And there were, after a while, there were some single-celled organisms, archaea and bacteria. Then eukaryotes evolved by the symbiosis of prokaryotes. And then around 600 million years ago, about a billion years ago, multicelled organisms arose about 6 times. Then in the Cambrian explosion, you get this massive diversity of all the phyla except vertebrates. And then everything has evolved, and here we are. And a critical clinical thing that I just saw that's relevant, this is great. The New York Times had a report of a 59,000-year-old tooth, a Neanderthal tooth, and it had a root canal using a Jasper drill, and the guy
Wow.
screamed. Now, how exactly did that come to be in the physicist's universe? And the guy didn't know about wine, and they didn't have lidocaine. So that came to exist in the universe. Can you use physics to deduce the specific evolution of the biosphere? I'm going to claim not and try to.
Well, Stu, okay, let's just go. So for our, for our audience, like these steps are really important because this is the really radical idea, right? We are told, sort of by the philosophy of physics, or we're told by popular physicists who will go unnamed, that, listen, once you have the standard model of particle physics, you're done. In principle, kangaroos, yeah, sure, kangaroos are in there. You just need like a really big computer. You could predict everything that ever has happened and ever will
And will
happen
happen.
once you have, right, once you have that, standard, the theory, a theory. That's what a theory of everything is. It's everything, right? But what you're saying is like that's a dream. That's a fantasy. That's not actually, that you can't pre-state everything or predict everything, particularly, and it's biology you're saying, and the
Yeah,
biosphere,
we
which is
can't. Yeah,
the disproof.
it's a sufficient condition if I can show you that we cannot. I'm going to say, of course, biology is based on physics, and it doesn't violate any laws of physics. But you cannot reduce biology to physics. Is going to be my claim. I like to brag about my Norwegian sweater too. I was in Bergen. You got to go to Bergen. It's anyway. So let me define for you. You guys know this, but for your audience, Immanuel Kant is the philosopher you think you know about from about 1790. He was trying to find a notion of a natural purpose, and what he came up with was profound. He said, "An organized being, namely a living being, has the property that the parts exist for and by means of the whole."
Mm.
So I picked that up, and that's what I will call a Kantian whole. So we're all Kantian wholes. Proof. Adam, you exist because you got livers and kidneys and spleens and glasses. But you're leaving out the glasses. They exist because they're part of you,
Mm.
right? So, if you took your liver out and left it on the side of the road, it would just die, and you would too.
Mm.
So it's really true that organisms, even a bacterium, the whole exists for and by means of its parts, and the other way around. You can even say it for viruses. A virus in a cell reproduces itself, and it too is a Kantian whole. Now, this now becomes very important. There's an
Stuart,
old joke.
wait,
Yeah,
Professor Kauffman.
yeah.
What? So how is that different from a car? Just, why a car has parts, and
I'm gonna,
why is that different?
like I'm gonna get there. I'm gonna
Okay,
get
good.
there. Biologists are always talking about the function of a part, and then they worry about whether or not you can define function. And I won't give you the standard joke, but it's cute. So once you've got the idea of a Kantian whole, there's a non-circular definition of a function. So let me be slow and specific. See if you guys agree. The function of a part is that specific causal property that sustains the whole. It's not all the causal properties, it's the specific causal property that
Mm.
sustains the whole. So the function of your heart is to pump blood, but your heart makes heart sounds and jiggles water in the pericardial sac. They're not the function of your heart,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
Already there's going to be a puzzle for physics. What do you mean by the specific subset? Okay. So now, the function of your heart is to pump blood, but it does wiggle water in your pericardial flex, and it does make heart sounds. So Darwin had this wonderful idea that he called a pre-adaptation. What he said is that an organism evolved for some function in a different environment might turn out to be useful. It's not that it was selected for it, and it might be co-opted for a new function. So we call them Darwinian pre-adaptations, and Stephen Gould and Elizabeth Verba call them exaptations, which is a lovely word. So
Hmm.
the silly hypothetical example is the heart really is a resonant chamber. Therefore, it might pick up earthquake pre-tremors, and you skedaddle out of there. And there's all this evidence that animals sense something, and that may be why. I mean, we do have resonant chambers. So in that case, the heart would evolve a new function, namely get out of there for safety. Um, so what's happening is a new use of the organ comes to be a function that sustains the organism. So central to everything we're going to talk about is acceptations. Hold it. Why biological evolution seems like it's open-ended. So it looks like it is. Statement of fact, people have been trying to achieve open-ended evolution in artificial life and computational systems, and they always get stuck. Everyone. And achieving open-ended evolution is a challenge that life hasn't achieved. We also haven't achieved general artificial intelligence. My bet is because in both cases, they're formal systems. They're not embodied systems, which will be close to your heart, I think. And I really want to talk to you about this.
Professor Kauffman.
Yeah. What?
Just a question about, because this is something I'm
Adam,
interested
if you
about.
got to go to the bathroom, for God's sake.
No, I just got questions. The A life, and I'm just been listening to a podcast by some people who are saying, talking about how great A life is, and all the simulated evolution, the simulated artificial creatures, and how much it's achieved. So tell me, this idea that they haven't achieved open ended. What do you mean by that? Like, so because they do see, like parasites forming. They see amazing.
You get
things
parasites
forming.
and hyperparasites. It's not my field. I knew Tom Ray years ago, and look at Avita, and Norm Packard's an old friend. They're all writing about the criteria to get open-ended evolution, and they claim they've not. And we haven't gotten artificial general intelligence.
Yeah,
either.
for sure. What would open-ended mean? I just don't know what it means. What does open-ended evolution mean in this case, you think?
The evolution of the biosphere seems to keep generating novelty for 4 billion years. This is an ongoing experiment for 3.97 billion years. So then the question is, why could that be? So take it in that it looks like it's true. Why? Well, if Kantian holes are real, and if function is real, your heart is an embodied thing. It's a heart. And it does have myriad causal consequences. And it is true that alternative causal consequences could turn out to be useful and be acceptations. And so that could be open-ended evolution. But now I have to say some things. So now I have to introduce the term affordance. Evan, I'm sure you know it. But affordance was introduced by Gibson. A horizontal board affords you a place to sit. So let's pause over this. They're real. You really can sit on a board. It's a triadic relationship. I can use a board to sit on. So I have a goal, it's to rest, and I can use this object X and a causal property of it, it's horizontal, to sit on. It's not an independent degree of freedom, and it's not position or momentum. It's a relational degree of freedom, so it's contextual. Okay?
Right.
So here's the next big step. Andre and Rolly and I got it. This is just weird how we got here. So I now take you to my favorite and then my next favorite examples of uses. It's the screwdriver. And 3 years later, I found my way to the engine block. This was evident, I trained in medicine, I'm kind of dumb. So what can you do with a screwdriver? Well, you can screw in a screw. You can wedge a door closed. You can try the screwdriver to stick and spear a fish. You can rent out the spear and take 5% of the catch, blah, 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 blah. Now, what are the different uses? There's 4 scales: nominal, ordinal, interval, ratio. Well, different uses are just different names, right? So there's no ordering relationship among them. They're just different uses. Second, you cannot deduce from one use the other use. So from the use of the screwdriver to screw in a screw, you cannot deduce that you can use it to spear a fish and rent out the spear. So we've already got two things. It's a nominal relationship and it's not deductive one to the other. And the third thing is the following that we got to first. Can you list all the uses of the screwdriver? Well, exactly how would you do that? I mean, so this is the third thing I'm going to get is that it's not listable. We got to it, Andrea Rowley and I, the hard way, or whatever the hard way is. So, how would you list the uses of a screwdriver? 400 years ago, nobody could use a screwdriver to short a circuit, right?
Right.
Who knows what we're
Right.
going to do with a screwdriver 2,000 years from now? Then it's so wonderful. It took me a long time to get to the engine block. I got to it because I knew the following story. Some people around 90 years ago or 100 years ago were trying to create a tractor. This is historically true. And they had this huge engine block and they mounted it on the chassis and it crushed the chassis. So they kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger chassis and they kept crushing the chassis. This is really true, Marcelo. Finally, somebody said, yeah, now the engine block is so big and rigid, we can use it as the chassis. That's how tractors and Formula cars are actually made. That's a new use of the engine block, right? You don't drill holes in it and make an engine. Yeah, you use it, okay, right? So Andrea and I then really started thinking about what can you do with an engine block? Well, you could polish one side and it's a mirror. You can make it kind of a concave, and it's a telescope mirror. Um, After a long time, we realized you could use it as a paperweight. This was hard to do. And finally, we got to the corners are sharp, and you can crack open a coconut, right? Well, same thing. These are just different uses. It's an order, just nominal. You can't deduce the different uses. Can you list them all? Well, no. Then Andre and I were talking about 3 years ago, and I was saying there's something wrong about this axiom of choice. And so we looked at set theory, and one of the axioms is the axiom of equivalence, or extension rather. Here it is. Two sets are identical if and only if they have the same members. And we just started laughing, said, we got it. So I cannot prove that the uses of an engine block are identical to the uses of a screwdriver because I can't list them.
Right. Right.
I really can't. I really cannot list the uses of a screwdriver, and I really can't list the uses of an engine block. So I can't prove that their uses are identical. Therefore, I don't have the axiom of extensionality. Therefore, I don't have set theory. I just don't. Furthermore, the axiom of choice turns out, when we read the appropriate books, to be the same as well ordering.
Mm-hmm.
So there's
Yeah.
no well ordering. They're just nominal scales. So we said, well, what about numbers? We were really enthusiastic. We thought, this is smart. So can you get there with Russell? So Russell said the number 2 is a set of all sets that have exactly 2 members. Well, that's a set of all objects that have exactly 2 uses.
Right. Right.
And then you can't do 3 and you can't do 0. So we can't get numbers from Russell. So we said, okay, let's try the other guy whose name, I'll get it in a minute. Anyway, for the other person whose name will come back, you need 0 and +1. But we can't get 0 and we can't get +1 because we don't have an ordering relationship. So we can't get numbers from Russell and the other person whose name will come back to me. That means we can't get 7 and we can't get 9 and we can't get 7 + 2 is 9. And we can't get 7 + x is 9. So we can't get equations. So we can't get x squared plus x is equal to 14. So we can't get, negative numbers. We can't get square roots. We can't get irrational numbers. So we can't get the line. We can't get the real line. We can't get decimals.
So is this wait? So just so I understand, So, I mean, what you're saying is that sort of like the world of biology, the world of where things have functions, right? Because a rock doesn't have a function. A rock is a rock. You can say there are things that happen with rocks, but it's not like rocks have functions. What you're saying is that this world of biology, the world of Kantian wholes, if it's a Kantian whole, that actually the formal systems of mathematics, hence the formal systems of mathematical physics, that they don't really hold, and all the metaphysics that comes out of formal systems, like, oh, the universe is pre-statable, there's only so many things that can exist.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
so
somehow inapplicable. It's I'm not going to say nothing about life is going to break the laws of physics. It's life's doing something else. So can I jump ahead and get to catalytic constraint closure?
yeah, but it's still, wait, have you, but I still have the question about the cars, like why cars are not, are we going to get there, or should we
I
stop
I,
here
I
just
got to get to catalytic and constraint
okay,
closure.
okay, good, okay.
That will answer the question about cars.
I want to know
Exactly.
about cars, man.
But that answers the question about cars. Cars don't have catalytic closure. Anyway,
They have
go on.
catalytic converters, though.
That's different.
That's different.
Okay, Stu, please go on.
So the first idea is one that I had in 1971. What is life? And I thought, do you need template replication? I said, well, what if life is a bunch of molecules fed from the outside? So it's an open reaction system, and the molecules catalyze the reactions that make the molecules. So that's a collectively autocatalytic set. So they exist. By the way, nobody's managed to get template replication yet. They keep trying. It might work one day. We now have seen, so collectively autocatalytic set is from the outside, half parts of each of us are being fed in. So there's a half parts of Evan are coming in, and of Marcelo and of me and of you, Adam. So I catalyze the ligation of the two half parts of Evan to make a second copy of Evan. Evan catalyzes the formation of the two parts of Marcelo to make a second copy of Marcelo makes me, and I make you. That's a collectively autocatalytic set. It's been done with peptides by Gonan Ashkenazi. He's got 9 peptides, and each one does what I just said. So a collectively autocatalytic, the peptides have been made of RNA molecules have been made. And quite stunningly, a wonderful woman named Joanna Xavier has found small molecule collectively autocatalytic sets with no DNA, no RNA, no proteins.
Wow.
In all 6,700 prokaryotes. And we know by analysis on a computer that they're there. The limit, nobody's actually put them in a test tube to see that it works, but pending that. So I think molecular reproduction arose in the universe by the emergence of small molecule collectively autocatalytic sets. So hold that. So that's collective autocatalysis. It's getting to constraint closure that is, this is going to be a physicist story. I mean, you guys know I'm an MD, so I was writing my third book, Investigation. I was trying to understand the work cycle. And I read Atkins, and I was wondering, so what's work? Even I know it's force acting through a distance, whatever that is. And Atkins says, no, it's not. It's the constrained release of energy into a few degrees of freedom. So Marcelo, I'm trying to understand that. And I thought, okay, there's a cannon and powder and a cannonball. And when the powder explodes, you don't get a spherical wave. The powder explodes and expands down the remaining degrees of freedom, called the bore of the cannon. Right. And it does thermodynamic work on the ball, and it really does, and blasts up the hill. So I said, okay, no constraints on the release of energy, no work. Then I said, but where'd the cannon come from? Right. You guys don't say that. You put in move, right? You solve it.
Right.
I'm a biologist. So where'd somebody made the cannon. They really did. So work can construct constraints on the release of energy. Newton tells us we need boundary conditions, but doesn't say where they come from. So, work can construct a cannon, which is a boundary condition constraint. And I got stuck there for 15 years. I was looking at the answer in my own papers, but I was too stupid to see it. In 2015, Matteo Mosio and Mel Montevel solved the problem, but then I did it in a different way. They said constraint closure, they mean, is a set of constraints that mutually depend upon one another. I'm going to tighten this, you guys, in a very important way. I will not mean merely depend upon. I will mean constraint B depends upon constraint A. If constraint A constrains the release of energy in a process that releases energy into the few degrees of freedom that constructs B. So Evan, this all just gets magical. It just goes bang, bang, bang. So here it is. This is weird because it marries constraints and flow processes.
Yes.
You guys will tell me whether this already exists, but we sort of stumbled across it. So here it is. I'd like to get some work. So I've got 3 non-equilibrium processes, 1, 2, and 3. So I need some constraints, A, B, and C. So I'll go real slow. A constrains the release of energy in process 1, and it constructs a B. B constrains the release of energy in process 2, and it constructs a C. C constrains the release of energy in process 3, and it constructs an A.
Goes back to A. Yeah.
So this is really weird. It's a set of boundary condition constraints with the property that they couple to some non-equilibrium processes and construct specifically the same boundary condition constraints. They construct themselves, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like they really do.
Yeah.
And now here's
the self-referential. That's what's always weird about life is it's self-referential.
Yeah, so it's self-referential, and it's this weird thing that marries boundary conditions and flow processes. And now the difference between that and a car is this thing constructs itself. The car is full of all sorts of parts and constrained releases of energies, and the gas explodes as the wheels turn. The car doesn't construct itself.
Right.
Cells
Right.
do. So I'm now going to marry the two, and it's the union of catalytic and constraint closure. I think I'm telling you what life is. In fact, I'm reasonably confident, but this is Andrea and me. We might be wrong, but try it. Gunnar Ashkenazi's 9-peptide autocatalytic set. The peptides are the substrates and the products, but they're also the constraints. Peptide 1 binds the 2 half fragments of peptide 2. It orients them in 3 space. It lowers the activation barrier for that reaction. So that reaction takes place and work is done because a peptide bond is constructed and an ATP is converted to ADP. So peptide 1 is the constraint that constructs peptide 2. 2 constructs 3 around the cycle. So it is a Kantian whole that is already a union of catalytic and constraint closure.
Right.
I think that's the elemental definition of life.
Stu, how does this, so that's right. I think this is like super interesting because it also, right, what so much of what the origin of life sort of focuses on is just, how do we get these replicators? We need replicator molecules. But it never it's the second part in particular, which is how do you get the constraint closure? How do you get the boundary conditions? How do you get the...
I think that's the new thing, and it was sort of hovering there. So 2 weeks ago, my wife Kate was talking about forms, and I couldn't figure out what she was talking about. And I thought, didn't Aristotle talk about forms? So I said, So I looked up Aristotle, and what I've just told you, I think, 2,400 years later, is a thermodynamic physical realization of Aristotle's form. So just hear it, Evan. And this goes right to your embodiment and all of the other stuff I know you love, Evan, that I'm anxious to talk to you about. So as I'm understanding it, the form is that which makes the oak tree the oak tree, that which makes the rabbit the rabbit. It is the essence of the thing, right?
Yeah.
Now, next, the same thing is the vegetative soul for Adam, right? The it's metabolism. It is reproducing yourself.
Yeah.
So
I see that. I've never heard this term. Wait a second. Let me just ask a couple questions. So first of all, so sort of for Evan, what is the difference between sort of this because we've talked about this a lot, the Aristotelian causes, right? The whole idea of the
4 causes.
The 4 causes, which I've seen used in these, so Robert Rosen, who's been a hero of ours.
And I'm going to show it to you again. It's really weird. So let's take his 4 causes.
Hey, Stu,
Yeah,
can I ask a question like
sure.
pretending I'm a listener? So when you talk about Aristotelian forms and you say the rabbit, how did you say the rabbit is the form of the rabbit? Is that what you said?
The form of
Is
a
the
rabbit
essence of the rabbit.
is the
What does that
essence.
mean? I'm not sure I understand what that means.
It's what makes the rabbit be a rabbit
Yeah, it's
rather than a
it,
car, rather than a bacteria.
yeah.
Yeah.
What's so weird is we almost can't hear the words, right? We want to know what the parts are and how they're moving because that's what Newton taught us to do. That isn't what Aristotle was talking about. He was talking about the form of the rabbit, and nobody knew. Well, people there's Avicenna that I've been finding. This amazing
Indeed.
Arabic philosopher in the year 1000, and there's Aquinas who's talking about the form, and it all disappeared with Kepler,
Yeah, that's
Galileo,
why I'm
and
having
Newton.
trouble with it. I mean, like, what do you mean? Like, how the,
Well,
Yeah,
yeah,
isn't
like, so that there's some
but
go
sort of,
ahead.
isn't the form what gives something its identity?
Mhm.
So
Exactly.
Yeah,
isn't
Yeah.
but isn't
Exactly.
it obvious then that what is new here? I'm not quite sure I understand.
it's well. Go ahead, Marcel.
I just don't understand the connection between close out. I
So
just don't
the
understand
the
the connection.
catalytic closure
Uh-huh.
of whatever particular sort it is, it individuates that system as the kind of system it is as an individual system. So
Yeah,
it gives
Evan,
you
you
an
put together.
answer
It's not just catalytic closure; it's the unit of catalytic and
right
constraint
and
closure.
constraint.
So
Yeah.
what's happening, Marcelo? See if I can say it this way: it's the causal efficacy of organization itself. This
Yeah. It's
organization
organization.
constructs itself specifically, and we don't have the notion of organization as having causal power, but it does. It builds itself.
This is something I'm super, Evan and I have talked about this a bunch of times. I'm trying to work out, right? As a physicist, I'm used to like having, there's matter and matter has forces. And so, that's how it exerts. So, but like organization, there's like no place in physics,
Yeah,
in the ontology of physics for organization to have causal power. Because
yeah,
organization is this weird kind of abstract thing.
yeah.
And so, but it does
I've
see
never
like life. Yeah. So more, let's dive
Life's
into
got it,
this more.
and I've never understood it. But I've gotten to the about a year ago to the and Andre and I published an article with this union of catalytic and constraint closure. Then you can see it. You have to have a concept before you can see it. So
Mm.
the bacterium specifically constructs itself, right? There's another thing that's amazing here. Is this making sense, Marcelo? It's the causal power of organization itself because the boundary conditions constrain the release of energy in some processes that construct those boundary conditions. Another thing that's amazing, Evan, is the software hardware distinction vanishes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There is no
Exactly.
hardware software.
That's
It's
right.
not that
That's
the
right.
cell is executing itself, it's constructing itself.
Right. Right. And that's the link to embodiment is that you have a
Absolutely. This
bodily being that doesn't have a hardware software distinction, whereas
exactly.
computational systems are not bodily because you have a physical system designed to implement a certain software. Yeah.
And therefore the software system is substrate independent, but the bacterium isn't.
Exactly.
There's another thing. There's another thing that came to me, Evan. Feynman famously said, "If I understand it, I can build it." You can't build a bacterium; it builds
Right.
itself
Exactly.
from the inside.
Yeah.
Whatever that weird phrase is. So now I'm going to tell you that I think this is precisely. Well, it's 2,400 years later. I think this is a modern thermodynamic physical instantiation of something very close to Aristotle's form. And I found out it about 2 weeks ago, and I said, like, what?
Yeah. So somebody who's written about that actually is Alicia Warrero. You might know her work.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
She's
We
written on
connected it to-
exactly that. Yeah.
Oh, wow. She's
Yeah.
great. So,
She's fantastic. Yeah.
So can we
she is.
unpack that more? Can you unpack like this? Because this is, I think, yeah, especially, I don't know if Marcelo's having the same trouble I am. Because always what I want to say is like, yeah, okay, but where'd that come from? Like, how can something build itself? Because what often a reductionist kind of biological physicist will say is like, look, there was an author, there was a programmer, and it's called Darwinian evolution, right? This didn't build itself. It was evolution, first chemical evolution in a warm pond with molecules bouncing around until you got a replicator, and then you got replicators that became better replicators, and then eventually you had the first protocell, lot. So they would reject this story and saying like, no, it is still all machinery with pre-stated initial conditions because fundamentally that's all what it is. So what's this idea of building itself? How does something build itself, and why isn't it just Darwinian evolution as programmed?
Well, hang on. Darwinian evolution is real, and Darwin says heritable variation and natural selection. He didn't know about genes. That's true. I mean, the eyes evolved many times, and multicelled organisms have evolved many. So Darwin came up with the selective filter without a designer, right? But Darwin doesn't come up with where did that which is selected come from?
Exactly.
What does that mean? I'm sorry, my brain just fried when you
It
said
means
that.
you need exactly what Stu is talking about, the constraint catalytic closure systems for evolution to have something to work with, biological evolution.
Yeah.
You can't get biological evolution off the ground unless you have those
Yeah.
kinds of things that differentially reproduce and then are selected.
But
I've
didn't
left out
those?
just a sec, let me go. I've left
Yeah.
out, Evan, how did you ever get on that in the first place?
Yeah.
Yes, well, that's a big question.
I got the answer.
What about that?
I got the answer.
But we're going to hear
So-
the answer now. So
Well, I published it in 1971. The basis so I've had this theory of the spontaneous origin of life, and it's physicsy. So I knew about Erdős and Régnier, and the giant component in a random graph.
Yep.
So I was wondering, does life have to be based on template replication? I said, no. What you need is a bunch of molecules and a bunch of reactions having the property that the molecules catalyze the reactions that make those molecules, said I. And then I did the following thought experiment. I got a bunch of molecules with ever more atoms per molecule and more reactions. Well, the more atoms per molecule, the more ways you can break it apart. So the more ways you can put it together. So as the diversity of molecules and the atomic complexity of the molecules goes up, the number of reactions among them goes up faster than the number of molecules, right?
Yeah.
Therefore, just say there's some probability that any molecule can catalyze any reaction, flip a coin, call it peak catalysis. And there's going to be a phase transition when so many molecules catalyze so many reactions that there's a set of molecules that catalyze their own formation. That's the giant component. And it's a first order phase transition. And it works on a computer. Okay. And we've made on purpose small collectively autocatalytic sets. I have believed since 1971 that life arose as this phase transitioned. And I still think it. So buy it for the moment. Once you've got this autocatalytic set of, I thought, peptides, it is both autocatalytic and constraint closure because the peptides are the ones that are constraining the release of energy to do the reactions. You automatically get the union of catalytic and constraint closure. So buy that for the moment. And now we've got the origin of life, I hope. There's a funny story, but I'll tell you later. So now we've got the emergence of Aristotle's form from the soup. And Evan, we've now got agency. So look at the properties of this thing. Oh, let's go through Aristotle's 4 causes. It gets really interesting. What's the material cause of this thing? It's the atoms. What's the formal cause? He doesn't mean formal like mathematical. He means the form. Well, the form is a union of catalytic and constraint closure. What's the efficient cause? Well, it's the catalyst catalyzing the reaction. Now, here's the magic thing. What's the final cause? The purpose. It's persistence. This thing in an open environment persists. It gets on with getting on, right?
Right.
Oh, right. That's its final cause. It's getting on with getting on. And the amazing thing is that as soon as you say that, relevance enters, right? Evan?
Meaning. It's why meaning is essential to the universe. The universe is not
Yeah.
meaningless. Yeah,
No,
right.
yeah, it's no longer meaningless because of good or bad for me.
Right.
So value
Right.
enters, and meanwhile, this thing is doing thermodynamic work to construct itself. Well, it can do thermodynamic work on the world. So it can now act in the world, and it's got goals, namely persist. And then I make it for me, it's a nonlinear dynamical system with a bunch of different attractors. So if it's in one attractor in the world and it's got an input, it does one thing. If it's in another attractor, it does something else. It's got a variety of responses to the world. And now all of that can evolve. And besides, it's probably dynamically critical. So what's amazing is we've got back to Aristotle's four causes, and we haven't persistence. This thing naturally persists. And Jacques Monod said, the project of every cell is to make two cells. This is it. Aristotle's forms were fixed. It's like the Newton's phase space is pre-stated. But life can evolve because of Darwinian pre-adaptations. So Aristotle's forms are evolving, and we've gotten to pre-statable, right? You can't pre-state it.
Right.
Can I
Yeah.
make one interjection?
Yeah.
Am I wrong to say that in the Aristotelian form, there is an external agent that gives matter the form that it wants, as opposed to life, which is giving itself the form that there is?
Like a
In that,
rock. What's the difference between a crystal in
look,
this sense, from the Aristotelian sense? What's the meaning of a
you get a
crystal, which
sword.
has a form, and
Well,
a rabbit?
in Aristotle's original discussion, he has the idea that the form is imparted through the idea of the architect who makes something according to a certain plan or organization. So that
Exactly.
aspect we're not going to carry over, of course.
So we have to be a little careful with when we talk about.
But the logic of the idea of form, you could say, is detachable from the idea that it's dependent on the mind of a designer.
But the purpose, the form is the purpose of the matter, right? There
Well,
is a like
the purpose is the final cause.
Yeah,
So
the
no,
purpose,
but the shape.
purpose,
I mean,
it's the telos.
yeah, the form
So
is
in-
the shape, the organization. The purpose is the telos, the end, the goal, which for life is to keep on going.
Yeah. So the form here, it sounds like form is form is one aspect of the causes of the four causes.
Yeah.
But it's its own thing, right? There's unpacking in itself. The identity. I mean, what's interesting too is the role of identity. That it's
It is identity.
metabolism.
Yeah,
Right.
it is
Metabolism,
identity.
which makes the rabbit the metabolizing rabbit, and it makes it that specific. It's not all rabbits. It's that specific rabbit, which gets a little zen on us.
That's exactly.
Yeah.
You see, one moves into Aristotle, I say, oh, that's what he was talking about. It's not any oak tree; it's this one.
Which is doing its self repair and self creation and
It
self maintenance.
specifically constructed itself, and you did too from a zygote,
Right.
right? It's just amazing. So we've got Aristotle's cause, and I persuaded you that we can't, that this is unprestatable?
Yes.
Yeah, I want to ask another question related to this. So, of course, I think the argument that it's unprestatable is very compelling. Then this is something that Adam and I have talked about, and also with Marcelo. I would intuitively be inclined to say it's also not Turing computable. So, what
Correct.
would you say about that?
It's not Turing computable. It's not a computation, Evan. It's a construction.
Right.
There's no computation going at all. None.
Ooh, Professor Kauffman, this is really important. I've been thinking about this. The difference between computation and construction, right? Because I've just been arguing with somebody about the whole von Neumann thing, or the von Neumann constructors.
I'll
right?
tell you.
Okay, good. Wait, let's just tell our
ahead.
audience. But let's just hold it. Wait, let me just tell the audience. The von Neumann constructor was this idea of like, von Neumann came up with this sort of like way of how you could build a machine with a set of instructions that could build itself. And I think we're saying like that's not what we're talking about here. I'm not sure.
No,
So go ahead, Stuart.
that's exactly right, Adam. It's really neat. So von Neumann was trying. He's come up with a universal computer, and he's trying to think of what would be a self-reproducing machine. So here's what he comes up with, and it's just brilliant. You've got this hypothetical machine, U. You can construct anything. So in order to construct something specific, you got to give it some instructions. And the constructions are created by taking some steel girders and welding together in some particular pattern, and you stuff it inside of you. And
Right.
now these instructions I have a dual use. They are used as instructions. So when you construct something, it's not a sailboat, it's another U. But the new U doesn't have any instructions inside of it yet. So you take this instruction thinking and you treat it as an object and you copy it with a 3D printer and you put the copy in the new U, and now you got another U with the instructions in it. So the thing about, and he's right, the universal constructor can construct anything, and it's got the software hardware distinction right there.
Right. Right.
The cell has no software hardware distinction. The union of autocatalytic and constraint closure constructs specifically, precisely itself. A cell is not a universal constructor. I mean, if it tried, it would be dead.
Right.
So what's wonderful is that von Neumann was right and entirely wrong. And so wonderful is that, you know, and then, you know, we responded by saying, God, that's just what DNA does. You know, it copies itself, and it's the instruction manual for the cell. And so the genes are the program that constructs well, that's not true. To restate it, the cell is the form, and the genome are parts of the form. The form builds itself, and the genome is another part that goes along and is, you know, incredibly important. This means something really weird for Evo Devo. We think what carries heredity is the template structure of the DNA, and it does, but the propagating form for 4 billion years is part of evolutionary continuity. So I'm about to talk to Scott Gilbert and Mike Levin, because we're all developmental biologists at Evo Devo. We have to rethink evolutionary developmental biology in terms somehow of Aristotelian form, which is strange and wonderful. So, and meanwhile, it's not pre-statable, right? So
Right,
the form
right.
is evolving in a way you can't pre-state. And then I got to something really weird, and then I'll be done. Do you guys know about the Tao?
Oh,
The
yes.
Tao.
Of
The
course.
Tao which
Tao.
can be spoken of is not the
Yeah,
Tao.
yeah. So the Tao that can, so you know, so of course the Tao, and then the Tao is the source of the 10,000 things, right? The indefinite is analogous to the Tao. The Tao is eternal. The indefinite is embedded in time. The biosphere now is full of creatures that create automatically an adjacent possible, but we don't know what's in it.
Mhm. Right.
Therefore, we cannot define probability. We don't have a measure.
Right.
We can't
Right.
define random. Then something becomes out of the indefinite. Something emerges out of the indefinite. You know, and it's a swim bladder. But that's a new actual, and then that yields something still new, right? So the Tao is, but this is diachronic. Meanwhile, there's one more thing to. Have I told you my swim
Wait, and
bladder?
let's just diachronic means through time, right?
Over time.
Over time.
So there's
Over time.
another big piece of this is a new actual. This is not in physics. A new actual creates new possibles.
Right. Right.
So let me
Yeah.
show you in two ways. So I fell in love with Joe's Cafe. So Adam, you and I are going to meet there 2 days from now for dinner. Damn place burns down today. What happened to the possibility we could meet there 2 days from now? It vanished. Well, certainly the place burned down, but beyond that, did anything causal happen such that we can't meet? No. There's nothing causal. A lot of things that were possible aren't. I mean, you can't develop, you can't cook French fries there anymore, and you can't deliver rutabaga to there. Now, meanwhile, so a new actual changes what's next possible. Now, suppose that tomorrow Joe rebuilds it. That's another new actual. What happened to the possibility that we could meet there? Well, we can do it again.
Right.
But we don't have, even in quantum mechanics, we don't have the idea that a changing actual changes what's next possible. So let me finish off this part with, so here's this my beloved swim bladder. You know, there's a fish with lungs, and it gets watered and evolves into the swim bladder, where the ratio of water and air to its neutral buoyancy. Well, so presumably selection struggled to make a functioning swim bladder. But this is the weird thing. Once there's a swim bladder, can a worm evolve to live only in swim bladders? Yeah. Well, selection might have struggled to make a swim bladder that works. Selection didn't struggle to create a new niche, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's
they're
really
forming all
true.
the time.
It's really true that evolution, without trying to do so, so to speak, keeps creating new possible ways for evolution to unfold.
Right.
So this is the indefinite, and it's like the Tao is the source of the 10,000 things. In some weird way, this indefinite, I don't know how to say it more, is the source of, I don't know the word source, out of the indefinite springs.
Well, if we want to get Zen, form is emptiness and emptiness is form. Emptiness is the source of, I'm just actually literally working on a koan on this, that, difference, sameness is the root of differentiation, but differentiation is the activity of sameness. So yeah, the formlessness out of which all possibilities come from is also how possibilities are possible. So yeah.
This indefinite sounds to me more like Anaximander's indefinite than anything else. The
It could be, I
pre-Socratic.
don't know.
Yeah,
Can you explain,
because
Marcelo?
that's the whole. So this guy, he was Thales' student, and he disagreed with Thales, who said that everything is water. He said no, everything is the indefinite, which Greek is called the
Really?
apeiron.
Well,
Apeiron
they
in
were really
Greek, yeah.
smart.
Yeah, and he said everything comes from this, and everything flows back to it
Yeah.
Anaximander?
in the course of
That
time.
sounds very Taoist, yeah, or very Zen.
No
Yeah.
kidding. Wow.
Yeah.
It's time.
So that's way before Aristotle.
I did
and all
analytic
those.
philosophy. You will remember. So, Ivan,
Gentlemen, I have to say we are at 55 minutes, and we try
Let's
and
stop.
keep. Even though we could talk for the next
We could go
5
on
hours.
for hours. Yeah, that's right.
Our audience is probably like, okay, I'm full. Thank you.
I am so glad to have this chance with you guys.
Oh,
Yeah,
Stuart, thank you
likewise.
so much. It is,
Likewise.
and also, can I say, Stu, thank you for your work, right? Because we are, if it's true that our book, The Blind Spot, actually has had a reception that we've been surprised at, that people seem really ready for it, it's only because, people like you back in the 70s were really willing to be like complete radicals in sort of driving these, non-reductionist, non sort of,
Absolutely.
blind spotty kinds of ideas. So you guys were pioneers.
What's magic is, Adam, you're a physicist, and Marcelo, you're a physicist. And the question is, how's our physicists going to deal with this? So let me try to finish really rapidly with this. One possibility, one idea is that new possibilities arise. So the phase space is not fixed. New possibilities arise that you did not and cannot know. Therefore, you can't write down entailing equations. Suppose you take the sense, it's just epistemological. They were already there all the time. They always were already there, and that includes the swim bladder will evolve, and it's possible that the worm will come to live in it. Then it's possible that Rotaria comes to evolve to live only in the worm, and it makes a small molecule that feeds a starfish that changes the color spots on the starfish, and it's this web of possibilities. And they all exist already. Okay, how are you going to write it? How are you going to write entailing equations? I mean, roughly speaking, you're fucked either way. Right? So there's something really strange going on, and I don't think one can get out of it. And listen, we've got the three of you. What do you guys? I'm deeply glad we're talking. I mean, you are precisely the sort of people who will want to talk to you, or me, or Andrea. What do you guys think of this?
I think it's, I mean, for ourselves, so we're working on this project with, the Templeton Foundation to sort of develop a physics of agency, a physics of autonomous agency. And it seems to me like this is and we're doing this with the Santa Fe Institute. So it seems to me like we're going to need to be talking, Stu. We should probably talk more because it's exactly modeling this mathematically, these kinds of the constraint closure. One of the things we've been talking about is Rosen's idea. Varela's autopoiesis is to
They're
really,
all in here. Yeah, absolutely.
that's the future of that's 21st century physics, right? It's not the standard model. It's not black holes. This is the most important problem in physics.
In a weird way, this is just physics.
Yeah.
Leave out the quantum mechanics. Catalytic and constraint closure is just physics.
Yeah, right.
Marcel,
but it's organization. It's physics where organization matters. It's, and that's where the philosophy has to change and All right, but anyway, we are now at 58. So we're going to end. Thank you, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this as much as we did. Maybe we'll have Stu back at some point. I think as the project goes along, there's going to be more to talk about. But Stu, thank you so much. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, guys.